Today we're joined by the indomitable Charlie O'Driscoll. Charlie leads all technology hiring at Monzo. Prior to that, he was responsible for all software engineering hiring at Deliveroo through their IPO. And before that, Charlie and I worked together at Improbable. Welcome, Charlie.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So to jump straight in, I'd love to learn about your favorite or most memorable hire that you've ever made.
Yeah, absolutely. So when thinking about the most memorable hire, it's been quite a lot of my time in recruitment, and it's also hard to think about one person. When I was thinking about this question, it's easy to sort of default to sort of recent senior hires. So recently hired a CTO here at Monzo. I say recently, he's been here about 2 years now. It's a huge impact over his time. The org scaled massively. It's going to double again. Product's been shipped sort of a faster ever rate. And he's a great person to work with. He's been a brilliant partner for hiring, and that's Matej, who joined relatively recently. But when I actually think about a favourite hire, it's something much more junior and giving people more of an opportunity to develop and grow and fundamentally change someone's career. Matej's a fantastic person, and he's been brilliant for Monzo, but he was brilliant at Google before, and he would be brilliant if he'd gone somewhere else. So the thing that actually probably I think has been the best hires we've ever made is launching an internship for software engineering, which takes our customer operations team, so people who work in customer support, who want to change fundamentally their careers and their lives and what they do. And that's probably actually some of the favorite hires I've done. We're on the third iteration of that now at Monzo. And it really gives people a chance to change their lives massively. So that's probably actually the favorite type of hire I've ever done. It's more building something to help people change their career and their future rather than one heavy hitter moving from a Google to the C-suite at Monzo.
That's awesome. How many people have come through that program now at Monzo?
So we're 18 now, six, and six each year, and we're looking to grow it. They come through, they're in apprenticeship, so the internship into apprenticeship, they will spend 20% of their time working. We use makers who've done a sort of bespoke call for us. They learn to go, they work with their teams. The first cohorts now are fully embedded. They're off, they're in software engineering roles going through. And like the ultimate goal would be if you can have someone really senior who's come through that'd be the key thing for success. If you can have a director level person who came through that journey, that'd be awesome.
Homegrown talent. That's really, really awesome.
Exactly that.
In your experience, what's the difference between a good and a great hire? What sets them apart?
Yeah, I think it's really hard to tell between good and a great hire, and it's going to sound a little bit sort of non-committal from us in hiring. But fundamentally, I do think onboarding is one of the key things from separating from good from great. So typically you'll have a pretty robust interview process. You'll trust your interviewers. You'll trust that you can assess fairly about bias against a clear set of criteria to be successful in the job. And that should give you people who are at the bar, hit the behavioral things, can do the role. Typically, I think that the difference between good and great is that then onboarding experience for them. So I think there's loads of examples, anyone who's worked in talent for as long as you and I have, Paddy, where great people who've got really successful careers haven't landed for whatever reason in businesses, regardless of level, regardless of sort of background and where they've come from. That just hasn't been that. And I think that's typically down to the onboarding. So I think when you can make someone good to great is how they're set up for success when they come in. What are the clear things they need to do in the role? What's the support structure around them? I think there's a really big correlation between the tenure of your manager and the seniority to you of your manager to your success. So I think if you have a manager who's 2 levels above you, who's been in the business of 4 years plus, you're intrinsically going to have a better onboard experience than if you have a manager of the same level who's been there 6 months. So I think the real difference between good and great, I think that's so hard to assess in 4 or 5 hours of interviewing, but you should be able to hire everyone who's good and at level. And then the real difference between good and great, I do actually think fundamentally falls on that first 3 to 6 months of onboarding. And that's when you can really see the difference made.
That's really interesting. What do you think's key in that first period when it comes to onboarding? You've spoken there about your manager kind of knowing the business and kind of having the experience, but I guess are there any things that you like to see that are done that can help that process along, or any things that people could discreetly put in place?
I think there's two things. I think first thing's space and time. I think when people can fail is when they're expected to ramp too quickly and have too much there. And with that space and time, one of the most common reasons I see, and this is very much of a tech lens because that's what I know, it's not the fundamental skill of knowing how to code in a different way and slightly different rituals. It's navigating an organization. And I think the only way you do that is by learning how to communicate in a certain style, learning how ways work, learning how to interact with people, how to give and solicit feedback in a way that's authentic to you, but also allows you to be effective in the business. And I really think that is space at the start. So clear expectations, like in your first few months, it is just understanding, observing, building, coming with ideas, understanding how to challenge, understanding how to give and solicit feedback, understanding dependencies of the business. Because most of the time you'll see people who aren't successful, it's because they can't effectively communicate their ideas or work in a way that the business has been running at. It's very much people might have really good ideas, but they're not landing them correctly, or they don't know the interdependencies, or they don't know how to work cross functionally in a way that's specific to a business. Because we all like to claim we are exceptional at cross functional work. I've never seen it being the same at any of these businesses I work. So the definition of cross functional, well, by proxy, it doesn't really scale across different business. So I do think it's space and time to do it, and being clear and goaling and expectation setting as well, right? So people coming in new, they want to deliver impact, but say the way you deliver impact is just listen for 2-3 months, just understand, listen, hear more than you say, and then start formulating ideas and trying to add value there. Because I think when people run in and think this worked at, me for example, this worked at Deliveroo, I instantly think it will work at Monzo without the context or understanding why it might not. That's typically how people then start to fail.
It's really interesting. Thanks for sharing that. Thinking back over Monzo, Deliveroo, and potentially even back into improbable days, what's been the most challenging role that you've had to work or that one of your teams has had?
Yeah, I think it's tough to think about a challenging role because, I like to think all of my roles are challenging. And that's basically, I think, part of the arrogance of working in tech recruitment that breeds through us, unfortunately. But I did think that until I got to Monzo, and then I saw Katie, who does my role, but for the business side, some of the regulatory roles that she's had to work, they seem really difficult. So I'm quite happy that those fall under my world. I can't talk about those because, look, I haven't done that, but I'm very happy they aren't. The hardest one probably for me was actually back in Improbable, which was for field engineers or developer evangelists, essentially. And you'll know more about Improbable than most, Paddy, so I can probably give a little bit of context on that. Improbable was a platform to help people's bigger games, so basically more persistent worlds, and that was the idea behind it. So to have a field engineer or an evangelist, that was someone who could build games. And obviously to be a games engineer, it's not one of the most lucrative professions for having that tech skill set. So normally you're very passionate about building games. So we want someone who had the skill and knowledge and passion to build games, who essentially didn't want to build games. So they would have to know how to build games, but rather than build games, they would spend their time on airplanes building demos for people who would then build the games. Intrinsically, we're going against what someone who had that skill set would want to do. So you'd say, you want to build a game over 3, 4, 5 years and you want it to be amazing. Don't do that. Build a demo over 3 weeks and then let someone else build a game on it. So we needed skills and sort of drive that were very different. So that was a incredibly hard role for us to fill. There's basically one company, Unity, at the time, who were doing it. So we spent 12 months really with their lead evangelist, a chap called Jay, where we were convincing why Improbable would be the best place for him to work, what the future value could be of the business, how it could have changed games forever, how actually working on this side of it would give you bigger scope of impact because you can only work on one game over 3 to 5 years. Here you can work on loads of titles and impact fundamentally changing games. And we also had to convince him why London would be a better move than Singapore because he was living in Singapore at the time. So that was about a 12-month process. We flew him to London a few times, built a demo for him, gave him access so he could play and mess around with it. I did school search, met a lot of the team. And then about at 12 months is when he accepted and came over. And then he spent around 3 years there heading it up. So that was a very long one for us, really. But say there's such a finite amount of people who could do it. And of the people who can do it, it's not the most appealing role intrinsically because of what they like to do, which is build rather than make demos.
I remember that one. It's really interesting because I think sometimes when companies design and conceive of roles they want to have, they don't often apply the candidate's lens, which is why would that person want to come here and do that? And I think it's really easy sometimes for a business to get stuck in the idea of, well, like, oh, well, they'll just want to come here and do this, when actually, as you say, it's got to make sense for them. And so trying to find somebody that ultimately wants to do that job and thinking about how that's going to land for them, and sometimes architecting the role in a way that will actually make the ideal person want to, I think is key. But that's a super example. You touched on it a bit earlier, with the hires and the sort of individuals as they land in a business, and when they don't land well, or when they don't work out, what have been the patterns that you've observed beyond sort of the onboarding process? You spoke earlier about communication and communicating ideas, but I guess what else have you seen be a challenge for people coming into a business?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I go to type here. So when hires typically haven't worked out, I think there's always edge cases to this. Most of the time for me, it's behavioral. Uh, and if you look at the world we work in here in tech hiring, right, like typically you can assess technical skills, and then if you want to make a risk-based hire on some sort of lacking skills or experience, it's relatively binary. Like say systems design, for example, you can see some of the skills around scalability are lacking. That's really simple for a manager to say, okay, they are lacking some exposure or some complexity here. You can make a really simple decision. Can that be taught? Can they learn that skill from what we've seen them do before and how they've gone forward? It's relatively binary taking a risk hire on some sort of skill lacking. Behavioral's totally different. It's incredibly nuanced. It's much harder to spot. And particularly in the world of tech, it can be hidden by technical brilliance. So when I see hires not working out, most of the time it is down to behavioral issues. And it comes back to I think many people spoke about it very articulately before around, brilliant people aren't always technical brilliant people aren't the right people sometimes when bedding in. And it comes down to those behavioral flags and issues. So if someone is exceptional technically and they can add so much value, you've seen what they've done before, that is typically when managers and businesses can sort of skate over some of those behavioral flags. The reason being, point one, see above, they're harder to spot. They're much harder to nail down. Like it's a feeling, should be linked to a rubric of between few, but a lot of the time they're smaller flags. They're harder to spot. They're harder to articulate, and people are drawn to they have done this though. They have built and shipped this amazing thing. If we could build or ship a version of that, it would shoot us to the next level as a business. And that's a mistake that regularly happens. And I think people will continue to happen. That's where I mostly see it in there. So no matter how technically exceptional someone is, they still need to have the behavioral and values and ways of working that's linked to a business. And those things are deeply personal to the person. And they should be deeply personal to the business and the people within the business. So one company's way of working might not be the right way of working. And it's safe for the candidate, but they need to be the right way of working together. So some people will not be able to operate in some different environments and vice versa. And that's fine. There should be an acceptance of that, different styles and different ways of working. And as a candidate, if there's a way you don't like to work, you shouldn't try and, work in a way that's totally unnatural to you. It's going to cause unhappiness. It's not going to allow you to do your best work. So it should be something people are more open about and like going through it. And you see some really good examples of behavioral interviews. But typically where I've seen people not work out as a hire, it's more on that senior sort of IC level engineer where there are these sort of behavioral flags, and it's coming from a move fast and break things type of thing versus how do you gain consensus and move those things forward. And you'll see that at different stages of people's careers, and you'll see it at different stages of company as well, right? So that's, I think, the main reason why hires don't go out. It's rarely a technical flag that's been missed in the interview. It's typically a behavioral ways of working thing.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I think that it cuts both ways as well, because often when you see high performers in a role, they're high performers not just because of their sort of competence, the skill of the role that they have, but also, the way that they bring a team together or the way they collaborate or the way they problem solve. And so often, I try to kind of encourage hiring teams to think about what's the minimum viable skill, and the upside is often in those behaviors. But as you say as well, the downside is there as well. And so if I think back to the number of people that, I've hired people that have unfortunately not worked out, and the consistent thread there has been like sometimes around communication or collaboration. You mentioned earlier about the cross-functional working, like their ability to work super effectively with the product managers or the data scientists or the design team or whoever it may be. And so I think that that's where the most nuance is. And I think that's where, as recruiters, I think that's where we have to ply our trade the most
Yeah.
and, really sort of advise and support the business. And I think that's where we can be most valuable. Thinking about Monzo now, what advice would you give to somebody who's applying for a role at Monzo today?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I'm obviously biased. I love working at Monzo. So for anyone applying who is considering it, I first of all say do it. It's fantastic. But away from a sales pitch for myself and making my life easier, I genuinely think people should think about why they want to work here. And if they do want to work here, I think it's an amazing place. I say, see above, I'm biased. I really enjoy it here. I enjoy the people, I enjoy the thing, but we're a mission-driven company, essentially. We want to make money work for everyone. We want to make banking accessible. We want to make investing accessible. Look at some of the products we're shipping out. We want to make the complex world of finance way more accessible for every person, which it hasn't been so much before, particularly with legacy banks. And the reason for the success is the people who are here all believe that and they all buy into it and what we're trying to achieve. And that just permeates all the way through. So people who apply for Monzo, I should think about what Monzo is and does that appeal to you and why you want to work here. Maintaining that like through people who we hire, I think it's allowed us to scale to where we are in the time period we've done it in. So in 10 years, last week had our 10th birthday as a business. To scale where we have there, that is because every person coming into the business is fully aligned to what we're trying to achieve. And that stays sort of front and center in everyone's mind.
And what advice would you give to a candidate that's received a job offer? How would you guide them through that process?
Yeah. So I think when you get a job offer, the first thing to think about it is it's deeply personal. I probably think the three most important things that link to your overall happiness in life are where you live, who you live with, and then what you do. So what you spend your time doing. And all of that should play into a decision-making process when you have an offer. Now, financial side is clearly key, and that's part of that, and that like plays into some of it. But if one role is offering significantly more than other roles, I would typically ask why. We are dictated by market, as everything is. If one's exceptionally an outlier, there tend to be a reason as to why they need to overpay what the market will be paying. So take the financial side out of it. I then think, what does the role mean for the person and their family? What's the balance? What's the progression like? Does it give you the exposure and travel you want? Is it a mission you care about and value? And then the final piece is who you're working with. What can you learn from them? What are these people like? Are they people you're going to work well with? Again, see all the points we've gone on earlier, success around onboarding and behavioural and way of working and navigating a business. Are these the type of people you want to be spending all these hours every week with? And those would be the things that play into it when you get an offer for me.
Yeah, super interesting. I think, we work in a world where, many people are very fortunate and, obviously when you think about the financial side of it, there is a diminishing return often on the finances of it. And I think, if you can get, if you're in a very privileged position to get multiple offers and they all kind of, make sense for you financially, I think really focusing on where do you think you're going to be happiest? What makes the most sense? Because as you say, it's no good having an extra five grand in your paycheck if you're miserable every day.
Exactly that,
And you're hating your life. And, I know plenty of people that are in high paying roles that actually, if they were given the opportunity to do something they loved, they would much prefer to do that.
Take it.
And so I think it's really important to think of that balance. Last couple of questions from me. What do you wish hiring managers knew about recruitment?
Probably the main thing I wish hiring managers knew about recruitment would be just the sense of funnel metrics and understanding of how the funnel works. And what I mean by that is sort of the skill that goes into hiring, the time that's needed to get a top of funnel working incredibly well, the assessing of candidates, the bringing them through, the engagement of them. So the close starts at the start. I always think that. I think that's something that will always remain true. So really understanding all the work that happens to get those 8 people at Loop, whatever it may be, to get those consistently hiring. We hire 25 engineers a month. To get hiring those 25 engineers in a month, what it actually takes a top one to get to that. That's something I wish hiring managers knew as sort of a staple starting. I will caveat that out massively though. I think a lot of that's on hiring to do that education piece. We're quite lucky here with our hiring partners. They're very bought in, they're very engaged, and they have got a good basic knowledge of that now, and they really understand it, and they've been shown it, and they're interested in it. I think that's something probably hiring as a profession don't do a good enough job of doing, of showing what goes into the top of the funnel to produce the hires. And I think people don't educate hiring managers on the capacity needed to make hires. So there's no silver bullet to recruitment. So if a leader will come in and say, I want to double the engineering org, they will typically then say, and you say, well, I need to double the hiring team. And there's the lead time for hiring recruiters and hiring them in. And they'll always say, what levers can we pull? But you wouldn't have that reverse conversation with engineering. So I say, I want you to double the output of code. And they'd say, oh, well, I need to hire twice as many engineers. So I'll say, what levers could you pull? That conversation would never happen. And I think there is a something we don't do in ourselves to do that. We've built a good model here at Monzo, so we're going through a huge scale at the minute. We've done a capacity plan, we're scaling, and it's phased in times when you get people on. But if there was a silver bullet to it, we wouldn't have a career and a role, right? But fundamentally, the way you hire great people, a diverse group of people, is through a really clean, crisp funnel with a clear value proposition and good recruiters understanding how to do that quickly as possible. There is no real way around that. Is high quality, diverse candidates going through a really good process with a fair offering at the end that will yield results. And I do think there's a slight disconnect in that. And I think most people who want to ask for exponential growth will always be asked, what levers can we pull? And there is no real secret lever, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's really true. I find myself speaking to a few founders over the years where they'll say, well, we need to double the revenue by this date, so we'll have to hire a bunch of salespeople. And when you kind of work backwards and you use the data they have and say, well, how long does it take you to hire? How long does it take you to ramp? And you realised they probably need to make that hire 6 weeks ago.
Yeah,
And so I think it's
exactly.
about that education piece to say like there is a lag time on this, and there isn't just a sort of someone hanging around outside waiting to come in and do that job today. You got to go and find them, bring them through the process, make them really want to be there.
Exactly
Last
that.
question. What do you wish candidates knew about recruitment?
What do I wish candidates know about recruitment? Probably a relatively simple one, that we just don't have AI CV screening. And that's something I see regularly on Reddit, X, LinkedIn, everything really, Glassdoor. We don't have it, and it's a human at the end of the day making human decisions. So that'd be something I would love more candidates to be aware of.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. Why do you think that is? Do you think it's because candidates feel that they aren't getting a fair shot or they aren't being seen, or because
I think
it's a
so, yeah.
pervasive myth, right? That there are these robots that are just going to like screen out your CV, or the ATS, you've got to write a CV to get past the ATS.
Yeah, and those are people who are selling services that aren't needed. So if anyone does think they need to pay for a CV writing service, please don't. It's the money's better spent probably putting down a drain, to be honest. It's better spent on anything. So I would heavily advise against that. I think it goes back to the point we are saying here, though. A career is deeply personal, and I can see why there'd be a frustration, right? If you have going to be, I've said, like, think about if you want to work at Monzo and applying, if someone's gone and done that and they've looked into it and they've really sort of read about it and think, yeah, Monzo's really cool, I want to be part of that. So they've already opted in. There is some sort of emotional connection of taking the time to do it. Then you go and do your CV, do the application, and by proxy, you could email just as a recruiter is then going in to do their shortlisting. So you could get a response really quickly just by look at the draw, right? Or you could have a wait time depending where it is. And I think it's because even when it's humans doing it, in an ideal world, you want everyone to get some real tangible feedback as to why. But we opened a special projects role, and we got 4,000 applications in 3 days. So you can't give meaningful feedback on that. But there is a recruiter going through it who is reading the CV and then actioning it forward. So I understand why people do it, and it's probably easier just to be like, it's the machine getting it wrong rather than going and reflecting on the application itself. I do wish it's something we could give more tangible feedback on, but it doesn't work at scale, unfortunately.
Well, Charlie, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for sharing your
No
insights,
worries.
and we look forward to having you back in the not too distant future.
Lovely. Thanks for your time, Paddy.